Our marriage ends today, the Vampire King said. She replied, Then you should know I'm carrying your heir. The morning Seraphine had dreaded for 3 years arrived with deceptive tranquility. Sunlight, filtered through enchanted glass that wouldn't harm him, cast pale gold across the marble floors of the throne room. Aldrich stood by the towering windows, his blonde hair catching the light like spun silver, hands clasped behind his back in that infuriatingly composed way of his. He didn't turn when she entered. You summon me, your majesty. Seraphine kept her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly as they smoothed the emerald silk of her gown. She'd chosen it deliberately. It was the dress she'd worn the night they'd first danced together, before everything became complicated, before duty strangled whatever fragile thing had grown between them. Seraphine, her name on his lips, sounded like an ending. He finally turned, and those silver eyes, cold as winter frost, met hers without flinching. Our marriage ends today. The words hung in the air between them, sharp as broken glass. She'd known this was coming. The entire court had whispered about it for weeks. The Vampire King's political marriage to the human ambassador's daughter had served its purpose, 3 years of tentative peace between their realms. But peace was now secured through other means, treaties signed in blood and ink, and Aldrich needed a queen who could give him what Seraphine supposedly could not. Then Heir. Irony tasted bitter on her tongue. I see, she managed, lifting her chin with the dignity her father had drilled into her since childhood. And what are the terms of my dismissal? Something flickered across Aldrich's perfect features, so brief she might have imagined it. You'll retain your title as Dowager Queen, a manor in the southern provinces, a generous pension, and the freedom to remarry should you wish. His tone was businesslike, rehearsed. The dissolution will be announced as mutual and amicable. How civilized, the words escaped sharper than intended. Seraphine. Tell me something, Aldrich. She took 3 steps forward, the click of her heels echoing in the cavernous room. In 3 years of marriage, did you ever once consider that perhaps the problem wasn't me? His jaw tightened. The physicians examined you thoroughly. The vampire physicians, she interrupted, who serve at your pleasure and tell you exactly what you wish to hear. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his features. What are you suggesting? This was the moment, the revelation that would either save her or destroy whatever remained of her dignity. Seraphine drew a slow breath, feeling the secret she'd carried for 6 weeks pressing against her ribs like a trapped bird. Then you should know I'm carrying your heir. The silence that followed was absolute. Aldrich went preternaturally still, that vampire stillness that made them seem like living statues. His silver eyes widened fractionally, the only sign of his shock. That's impossible. Impossible, she laughed, the sound hollow. You're a centuries-old vampire who can move faster than sight and compel minds with a glance, but a pregnancy is impossible. The physicians said. We're wrong. She pulled a folded parchment from her sleeve, the motion deliberate and calm despite her racing heart. From Dr. Helena Morse, human physician. She confirmed it 3 days ago. He crossed the distance between them in a blur of movement, snatching the document with hands that, she noticed with grim satisfaction, weren't quite steady. His eyes scanned the page once, twice, 3 times. This could be forged, he said finally, but doubt threaded through his voice. It could be, Seraphine agreed, but it's not. You can summon Dr. Morse yourself if you wish, or wait 2 more months when it becomes obvious. Aldrich's hand moved unconsciously toward her stomach, then stopped midway, falling back to his side. The gesture sent an unexpected pang through her chest. In 3 years of marriage, he'd touched her rarely, their relationship a careful dance of political necessity and unspoken boundaries. Except for those handful of nights when duty required consummation, when something that felt dangerously close to genuine desire had flickered between them in the darkness. Apparently, one of those nights had taken. Why didn't you tell me sooner? His voice had gone quiet, dangerous in its softness. Because I only confirmed it 3 days ago, and you've been in the Northern Territories for the past fortnight. She met his gaze steadily. And because I assumed that when you returned and immediately summoned me to announce our marriage's end, you might have forfeited the right to timely information about my condition. A muscle jumped in his jaw, This changes everything. Does it? The question came out more vulnerable than she'd intended. Or will you simply accuse me of infidelity? After all, the convenient narrative has been that I'm barren. Much easier than admitting your own physicians are incompetent. I never said you were barren, I said. He stopped, dragging a hand through his blonde hair in a rare display of agitation. The court demanded an heir. The council has been circling like vultures, questioning my strength, my right to rule if I cannot produce a successor. They said 3 years was more than sufficient time. So you decided to discard me. Seraphine wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the sunlight streaming through the windows, like a broken tool. That's not, Aldrich turned away sharply. You don't understand the pressures of ruling our kind, the expectations. My cousin Brennan has been gathering support, suggesting that my marriage to a human has made me weak, that I've grown too soft. He's been pushing for the council to declare me unfit. This was more than he'd confided in months, perhaps in their entire marriage. And a half-human heir, Seraphine pressed. How does that solve your political problem? Won't that make things worse? A half-human heir is still an heir. It proves the bloodline continues. He faced her again, and something in his expression had shifted, the cold king replaced by someone more uncertain, more real. But Seraphine, if this is true, a pregnancy of mixed blood is dangerous. There are complications, the development is unpredictable. Your human body attempting to nurture a partially vampiric child. I'm aware of the risks. She'd done her research the moment Dr. Morse had confirmed her suspicions. The survival rate for human mothers carrying vampire hybrids was just above 50%. The odds for the child were only marginally better. But this is happening whether you dissolve our marriage or not, whether you believe me or not. Aldrich was quiet for a long moment, his silver eyes searching her face as if seeing her truly for the first time. Do you want this child? The question caught her off guard. In all her anxiety about the pregnancy, the revelation, his reaction, she'd barely let herself consider her own desires. She pressed a hand to her still flat stomach. I don't know, I didn't plan this, but it's happening and it's mine, and I will protect it with everything I have. Something softened in his expression. Then the dissolution is postponed. You'll remain queen and we'll ensure you have the best care available, both human and vampire physicians working together, whatever you need. How generous, she said dryly. So I'm useful again now that I serve a purpose. He flinched, actually flinched. That's not fair. Isn't it? 3 years of maintained composure, cracked like a dam breaking. You summoned me here to end our marriage without warning, without discussion, after 3 years of barely speaking to me beyond what protocol demanded. You've treated me like an inconvenient political obligation from the beginning. The only times you've shown any hint of genuine feeling were those nights when duty required you to attempt producing an heir, and even then, you couldn't leave fast enough afterward. Seraphine. No, she held up a hand, tears pricking her eyes but refusing to fall. You don't get to Seraphine me right now. You want to postpone the dissolution? Fine. I'll stay for the child's sake, because a bastard heir would have an even more difficult life than a half-blood legitimate one. But don't pretend this is suddenly a real marriage. Don't pretend you feel anything beyond relief that your political problem has been solved. She turned to leave, pride demanding she exit before the tears fell. I was trying to protect you. His words stopped her at the threshold. What? Aldrich still stood by the windows, backlit by filtered sunlight, looking more alone than she'd ever seen him. The dissolution. I was trying to protect you from the court, from the danger of being tied to a throne that's crumbling beneath me. Brennan isn't just gathering political support. There are whispers of challenge, of blood feud, I thought. If you were no longer my queen, you'd be safe from what's coming. Seraphine turned slowly. You were protecting me by throwing me aside. By setting you free. A bitter smile touched his lips, though I see now how that distinction matters little from your perspective. For 3 years, she'd believed herself married to a man of ice and duty. Now, with war possibly looming and an impossible child growing inside her, he was finally showing her something real. She didn't know if that made things better or infinitely worse. The child, she said finally. What happens when Brennan and the others discover it's half-human? Won't that give them more ammunition against you? Possibly, Aldrich's hand drifted to the sword at his hip, more habit than threat. But a challenged king with an heir is in a stronger position than one without, and despite what the court may think about human weakness, they'll think twice before threatening a pregnant queen. Even our kind has some honor. Some, Seraphine echoed skeptically. I won't let anyone harm you or the child. The intensity in his voice startled her. That much I can promise. It wasn't love, it probably wasn't even affection, but it was more than he'd given her in 3 years, and she found herself clinging to it like a lifeline. Then I suppose we have much to discuss, she said quietly. About physicians, about security, about how we're going to manage this impossible situation. Yes, Aldrich moved toward his desk, already shifting back into his role as strategic king. I'll summon Dr. Morse and my own physicians. We'll need to. Aldrich, she interrupted his planning, needing one more answer. That night, 2 months ago after the harvest festival, when you came to my chambers and she couldn't quite finish the sentence. Was that just duty for you? He froze, papers in hand, and for a long moment didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low she almost didn't hear it. No, it wasn't. Then he resumed, shuffling documents, the moment of vulnerability sealed away again behind royal duty. Seraphine left the throne room with more questions than answers, one hand pressed protectively against her stomach, where an impossible future was taking shape. The morning she dreaded had arrived and passed. What came next she couldn't begin to imagine. 3 weeks after the revelation, Seraphine discovered that pregnancy in a vampire court was less about glowing maternal joy and more about becoming the center of an increasingly dangerous political storm. Absolutely not. Lady Cordelia, the court's master physician and a vampire of some 4 centuries, glared at Dr. Helena Morse across the examination room. Iron supplementation in those doses could poison vampiric development. And insufficient iron will kill the mother, Dr. Morse countered, her human stubbornness matching the vampire's supernatural intimidation. She's already showing signs of anemia. Seraphine sat on the examination table in her underclothes, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, feeling like a prize mare being evaluated by competing stable masters. This same argument had played out in various forms for weeks now. Perhaps, she interrupted tiredly, we could find a compromise, lower doses monitored carefully. Both physicians turned to her with identical expressions of professional affront, that they'd managed to build surprising agreement on exactly nothing, except their mutual annoyance at her interference. The door opened suddenly, no knock because the king didn't need to announce himself. Aldrich entered, took in the scene with a quick glance, and his expression tightened. Why isn't she dressed? It's freezing in here. We're conducting an examination, Your Majesty, Lady Cordelia said with exaggerated patience. Then get her proper covering. His tone brooked no argument, and resolve your disputes without using my wife as a bargaining chip in your professional rivalry. Wife, he'd been using that word more frequently lately, as if repeating it could make the relationship real. The physicians exchanged glances, a moment of unity against royal interference, before Lady Cordelia produced a thick, fur-lined robe. Seraphine accepted it gratefully, trying to ignore how Aldrich's gaze carefully avoided her partially clothed state. Even now, with her carrying his child, that careful distance remained. We've prepared a joint treatment plan, Dr. Morse said, handing Aldrich a document with barely concealed irritation at being managed, provided both parties can agree to stop undermining each other's recommendations. See that you do, Aldrich scanned the document quickly. Seraphine's health is the priority. Both of you answer to me if anything happens to her or the child. Am I clear? The threat hung in the air, polite but absolute. After the physicians departed, still bickering in undertones, Seraphine finished dressing behind a privacy screen, while Aldrich studied the treatment plan with the intensity he usually reserved for military strategy. You don't have to threaten people on my behalf, she said, emerging in a day dress of soft blue wool. I'm managing. You look exhausted. I'm growing a partially vampiric child while navigating court politics and mediating between feuding physicians. Exhaustion is implied. A hint of what might have been amusement touched his lips. Fair point. Then the almost smile faded. There's something we need to discuss. The serious tone made her stomach clench. What happened? Brennan has formally requested an audience with the High Council. He's calling for a verification of your pregnancy. Seraphine sank into a chair. He wants proof I'm not faking this. More than that, Aldrich's jaw tightened. He's suggesting that even if the pregnancy is real, there's no guarantee the child is mine. The accusation hit like a physical blow. He's calling me an adulteress. He's questioning the heir's legitimacy, which amounts to the same thing. Aldrich moved to the window, his habitual spot when agitated. The council has agreed to a formal examination in 3 days. What kind of examination? Blood magic. A vampire seer will be able to confirm paternity through your blood and mine. He turned to face her. It's invasive and uncomfortable but not dangerous. You can refuse, but refusal would be seen as admission of guilt. Seraphine pressed her fingers to her temples, feeling a headache building behind her eyes. Of course I'll submit to it. I have nothing to hide. I know, something in his voice made her look up. I know you've been faithful, Seraphine. I never doubted that. Your cousin clearly does. My cousin is a political opportunist who sees the throne within his grasp. Aldrich's hands clenched into fists. He's been waiting for any sign of weakness. This pregnancy, it threatens his plans, so he's trying to undermine it. What happens if he challenges you directly? Then we duel, said flatly as if discussing the weather. Single combat to the death or submission, winner takes the throne. Seraphine's breath caught. You can't. I can and will if it comes to that. He crossed to where she sat, kneeling so they were eye level in a gesture so unexpected her words died. Brennan is younger and reckless, but I have 3 centuries of experience on him. I won't lose. You can't guarantee that. His hand hovered near hers, not quite touching. Are you worried for me? The question was soft, almost vulnerable, and she found she couldn't lie. Yes, the admission came out barely above a whisper. Despite everything, the distance, the cold politics, the marriage that never felt like a marriage, I don't want you dead, Aldrich. High praise, he said dryly, but something warm flickered in his silver eyes. It's more than you've given me reason to feel, she countered, but without heat. They stayed like that for a moment, him kneeling, her seated, barely a foot of space between them but still not touching. The afternoon light painted his blonde hair in shades of gold and platinum, and Seraphine was struck by how beautiful he was, how beautiful he'd always been, and how careful she'd been never to let herself notice too much. After the verification, Aldrich said finally, when Brennan's accusation is proven false, I want to make a formal announcement about the pregnancy. No more secrecy, no more whispers. We present a united front. United, she tested the word. Is that what we are? We could be. He finally took her hand, the first time he'd voluntarily touched her outside duty in longer than she could remember. His fingers were cool against her skin. I know I've been distant, cold. You deserved better than what this marriage has been. Why, the question burst out before she could stop it. Why the distance? If not cruelty, if not indifference, why? Aldrich looked down at their joined hands. Because caring for you was dangerous. Dangerous how? Because I'm a vampire king with enemies who would exploit any weakness. Because you're human and fragile and could be taken from me in a heartbeat. His thumb traced absent patterns on her palm. Because I married you as a political arrangement and wasn't supposed to actually develop feelings for my human bride, but somewhere in 3 years of your wit and your strength and your stubborn refusal to be intimidated by our court, I did. Seraphine's heart hammered against her ribs. You have feelings for me. Inconvenient ones, a wry smile. It seemed easier to maintain distance than to acknowledge that my queen had become someone I couldn't bear to lose. And then the council demanded an heir, and when it didn't happen immediately, they saw an opportunity to push you out to marry me to someone more suitable. And he stopped, jaw working. I thought perhaps they were right, that you'd be safer away from me. You don't get to decide what risks I'm willing to take. No, he agreed. I see that now. Seraphine studied his face. This man she'd been married to for 3 years but was only now beginning to know. This pregnancy wasn't planned, but I'm not sorry it happened. Whatever comes next, whatever dangers we face, I'm not sorry. Neither am I, his hand tightened on hers. And I swear to you, Seraphine, I will keep you and our child safe, whatever it costs. Before she could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. Aldrich rose smoothly, dropping her hand and stepping back into proper distance before calling, "Enter." Marcus, the captain of the royal guard, stepped in with a bow. "Your Majesty, my queen, we've apprehended someone attempting to breach the queen's private chambers." I slid down Seraphine's spine. "Who?" "A servant, under compulsion. We're working to break it now, but the magical signature suggests someone with considerable power." Marcus's expression was grim. They were carrying nightshade and iron filings, enough to cause serious harm. Aldrich's entire demeanor shifted, the almost tender man replaced instantly by the warrior king. "Double the Queen's guard. No one enters her chambers without my explicit approval or Marcus's. I want that servant interrogated the moment the compulsion breaks, and I want to know who cast it." "Already underway, sire." "Good," he turned to Seraphine, and though his face was hard, his voice softened fractionally. "You'll move to the royal wing. The suite adjoining mine has better security." "That will cause talk," she said automatically. "Let them talk." His silver eyes glinted dangerously. "Someone just tried to poison my pregnant wife. I'm done caring about propriety." After Marcus left to implement the new security measures, Seraphine found herself alone with Aldrich again. The moment of vulnerability had passed, locked away behind necessity and duty. But something had shifted between them. Some wall had cracked, letting light through. "The verification in 3 days," she said. "What do I need to prepare for?" "Nothing but your courage." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Seraphine, what I said earlier about having feelings, I meant it. I wanted you to know that before things get more complicated." Then he was gone, leaving her in the examination room with her racing heart, and a hand still warm from his touch. 3 days until the verification. 3 days until Brennan's challenge was answered. 3 days until the court would be forced to accept the impossible, a half-human heir to the vampire throne. And somewhere in the palace, someone wanted her dead. Seraphine stood, squaring her shoulders, one hand moving protectively to her stomach. She'd survived 3 years as an outsider in this court. She'd survived a marriage of ice that was finally, impossibly, beginning to thaw. She could survive this too. She had to. The night before the verification, Seraphine couldn't sleep. She'd moved into the suite adjoining Aldrich's as ordered, and the rooms were beautiful, all dark wood and rich fabrics, with enchanted windows that could show daylight or stars depending on preference. But beauty didn't ease the anxiety churning in her gut. Tomorrow the High Council would verify her pregnancy through blood magic. They'd confirm Aldrich's paternity, and then what? Brennan would be forced to accept the heir's legitimacy, but that didn't mean he'd abandon his ambitions. The poisoning attempt had been thwarted, but there would be others. The physicians still argued over every aspect of her care, and she was growing a child that might kill her in the birthing. Small worries. A soft knock on the connecting door between her suite and Aldrich's made her start. "Come in," she called, assuming it was a guard with an update. But it was Aldrich himself who entered, still fully dressed despite the late hour. "I saw your light, can't sleep." "Too much on my mind." She sat up in the bed, pulling a robe over her nightgown. "You?" "The same." He hesitated at the threshold, as if uncertain of his welcome in her space. "May I?" At her nod, he crossed to sit in the chair by her fireplace, keeping a careful distance. For a while they sat in silence, oddly comfortable despite everything. "I got the report on the compelled servant," Aldrich said eventually. "The magical signature belongs to Brennan's court mage." Seraphine's blood chilled. "He tried to kill me." "He tried to kill the heir. You were just collateral damage in his eyes." Fury edged Aldrich's voice. "I've placed him under house arrest pending the council verification. After tomorrow, when your pregnancy is confirmed, I'll have legal grounds to charge him with attempted assassination of the royal heir." And if he challenges you before then we settle this the old way. Aldrich met her gaze steadily. I meant what I said, Seraphine, I won't lose. She wanted to believe him, needed to. Tell me something, she said impulsively. That night after the harvest festival, you said it wasn't just duty, what was it? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, you'd spent the evening dealing with Lady Morgessa's thinly veiled insults with more grace than she deserved. You danced with the human ambassador's insufferable nephew to maintain diplomatic relations. You'd smiled and played your role perfectly, and I watched you handle everything with such strength. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. And then, at the end of the night, I found you in the garden, shoes off, just breathing. Looking up at the stars like you were remembering there was a world beyond court politics. Seraphine remembered that night, remembered feeling exhausted and lonely and trapped. I came to the garden too, Aldrich continued. You heard me approach but didn't run, and when I asked if you were all right, you said. He smiled slightly. I'm managing, Your Majesty, but I'd manage better with honest company instead of royal protocol. I was probably too tired to be appropriate, she murmured. You were honest, and so I was honest back. We talked, really talked for the first time in our marriage. About your homeland, about the stars, about nothing important and everything important. And when I walked you back to your chambers, he met her eyes. I didn't want to leave. For the first time, being with you felt like something other than obligation. Tears pricked Seraphine's eyes. I thought you regretted it. You left so quickly afterward, and then you barely spoke to me for weeks. Because I was terrified. The admission came rough. Terrified of what it meant that I wanted my own wife. That I'd started imagining a real marriage instead of a political arrangement, that you'd somehow become someone I couldn't imagine my existence without. You could have told me. I'm telling you now. He rose, crossing to sit on the edge of her bed, closer than propriety allowed, closer than they'd been in months. Tomorrow we face the council. After that we deal with Brennan. But tonight I wanted you to know, whatever happens, I don't regret any of this. Not the marriage, not the pregnancy, not the complications, none of it. Seraphine reached out, taking his hand in both of hers. I need you to survive tomorrow. Whatever Brennan does, whatever comes, I need you to survive it. I will. He raised their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles in a gesture so unexpectedly tender her breath caught. We both will, all three of us. He stayed with her until she finally drifted to sleep, his presence a comfort against the dark. When she woke in the grey pre-dawn, he was gone, but a note on the bedside table read simply, Be brave, my queen, I'll be beside you. Seraphine dressed in silver and blue, the royal colours, and prepared to face the council's judgment. The verification would prove the truths. What came after? That remained to be written. The council chamber was a circular room of black marble and ancient magic, lit by floating orbs that cast everything in harsh, unforgiving light. 12 high-backed chairs formed a semicircle, the vampire lords and ladies who advised and checked the king's power. In the centre stood a raised dais with a silver basin inscribed with runes that seemed to writhe in the light. Seraphine entered with Aldrich at her side, acutely aware of every eye tracking her movement. She wore a gown of ice-blue silk that her attendants had assured her was appropriately regal, her dark hair bound in a crown of silver. She looked every inch a queen. She'd never felt less certain of her right to the title. Brennan stood among the council members, his resemblance to Aldrich superficial, the same blonde hair, the same aristocratic features. But where Aldrich's eyes held centuries of controlled power, Brennan's held hungry ambition barely restrained. Your Majesty, my queen, Lord Castellan, the eldest of the council, spoke with the weight of his 8 centuries. We are gathered to verify the claim of pregnancy and establish paternity of the potential heir. Does the Queen consent to this examination? I do, Seraphine's voice carried clearly through the chamber, stronger than she felt. And does His Majesty acknowledge the possibility of his paternity? I acknowledge it as certainty, Aldrich said coldly. This examination is a formality to satisfy those who would question my queen's honour. Brennan smiled thinly. Forgive me, cousin, but given the complications of producing an heir these past 3 years, surely the council's desire for verification is reasonable. Reasonable, Aldrich repeated, or a transparent attempt to undermine the succession before it's even begun. Gentlemen, Lady Morgessa, a power in her own right, cut through the rising tension. The examination will settle all questions. Shall we proceed? The court seer, an ancient vampire named Cassius, whose eyes had gone milky white with age and power, approached the silver basin. The verification requires blood from both the Queen and His Majesty. The magic will reveal the truth of lineage. Dr. Moore stepped forward from where she'd been standing among the observers. I'm here to monitor the Queen's well-being during the procedure. Unnecessary, Brennan said sharply. The seer is perfectly capable. The Queen's physician stays. Aldrich's tone brooked no argument. Continue, Cassius. The seer produced a ceremonial blade, silver, etched with more of those writhing runes. Your hand, my Queen. Seraphine extended her hand, trying not to flinch as the blade sliced across her palm. Blood welled up, dark red and human, dripping into the basin. The runes began to glow with a pale blue light. And yours, Your Majesty. Aldrich submitted to the same cut without hesitation. His blood was darker than hers, almost black in the strange light, and when it hit the basin, the reaction was immediate. The blood mixed and began to swirl, the blue light intensifying. Images formed in the luminescence, abstract at first, then sharpening into something recognizable. Seraphine saw herself, saw Aldrich, saw the moment of conception rendered in magical light. And then, emerging from the swirling blood, the outline of a child, small and half-formed, but undeniably present. The pregnancy is confirmed, Cassius intoned. 8 weeks and 4 days. The child carries the blood of Aldrich, son of Matthias of the line of the first knight. He paused, his ancient face creasing. It also carries human blood from the mother, a hybrid. This has not occurred in many generations. Murmurs rippled through the council. Seraphine watched Brennan's face darken with rage. A half-blood heir, Lord Castellan said slowly. That is unprecedented in recent history. But not without precedent, Aldrich countered. The law does not specify purity of blood, only legitimate descent from the royal line. My child, he placed subtle emphasis on the possessive, is legitimate and will be my heir. A half-blood will be weak, Brennan interjected. Unable to properly rule our kind. The throne requires strength, pure vampiric power. The throne requires a legitimate heir of the royal bloodline, Lady Morgessa cut in. Which this child is. Your personal opinions on hybrid vigour are irrelevant, Lord Brennan. My lady, surely you cannot seriously suggest that we accept. I suggest nothing. The blood magic has confirmed paternity. The law is clear. She fixed Brennan with a stern gaze. Unless you wish to challenge the law itself. It was a trap, and Brennan knew it. Challenging established succession law would turn even his supporters against him. I challenge the king's right to rule. Brennan's voice rang out and the chamber went deadly silent. Aldrich has shown weakness by allying with humans by producing a diluted heir. I invoke the right of challenge, single combat by the old laws. There it was, the moment they'd all known was coming. Aldrich smiled, a cold, dangerous expression. I accept, name your time and ground. Tonight, the traditional dueling grounds. Brennan's confidence radiated from him. And when I win, my first act as king will be to dissolve your marriage and disinherit the mongrel heir. Seraphine's hands clenched into fists, her cut palm stinging. Aldrich's hand found the small of her back, a small gesture of support. Bold threats for someone who hasn't won yet, Aldrich said mildly. Very well, tonight when the moon rises, the council will bear witness. Lord Castellan nodded gravely. So witnessed. Until tonight, both parties will refrain from hostility. The Queen will be escorted to protective custody during the duel for her safety. No, Seraphine spoke before she could reconsider. I will witness the challenge. My Queen, that's not advisable, Dr. Moore said urgently. The stress. I will witness my husband fight for our child's right to exist, Seraphine said firmly. I will be there. Aldrich looked at her, something unreadable in his silver eyes, then nodded. The Queen will be present under heavy guard. The council had no choice but to accept. The hours until moonrise passed in a blur of preparation. Seraphine was escorted back to her chambers where attendants fussed over her, checking her vitals, bringing her food she couldn't eat. Dr. Morse hovered anxiously. "Your blood pressure is elevated," the doctor said. "This stress isn't good for the pregnancy. Having my child declared illegitimate and disinherited also wouldn't be good for the pregnancy," Seraphine countered. "I'll manage." Aldrich appeared an hour before moonrise, dressed in fighting leathers that emphasized the warrior he'd been long before he was a king. He dismissed the attendants with a look. "You should eat something," he said, eyeing her untouched tray. "I'm not hungry." "Seraphine." "How can you be so calm?" The words burst out. "He could kill you. In a few hours I could be a widow carrying an orphan child that half the court once declared illegitimate." Aldrich crossed to where she stood by the window, taking her shoulders gently. "Look at me." When she did, his silver eyes were steady. "I have 3 centuries of combat experience. I was winning duels before Brennan was born. I know his style. He's fast but reckless, strong but undisciplined. I will win this." "You can't know that for certain." "No," he admitted, "but I can be confident and you need to trust me." Seraphine placed her hands over his where they rested on her shoulders. "If something happens to you." "If something happens to me, you take our child and you run. Marcus has been instructed to get you safely to the human territories where you'll be beyond the council's reach." His voice was urgent now. "Promise me. Don't stay and try to fight for the throne, don't bargain with Brennan, just run." "Aldrich." "Promise me, Seraphine." She wanted to argue, to insist she'd fight, but the fierce protectiveness in his eyes stopped her. "I promise." Some of the tension left his shoulders. Then, moving slowly as if giving her time to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was nothing like their handful of dutiful encounters. This was desperate and tender and real, the kiss of a man who might be facing his last night alive. Seraphine kissed him back with equal desperation, her hands fisting in his leather armor, trying to memorize the feel of him. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Aldrich rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to win," he murmured, "and then we're going to figure out how to actually be married, properly this time." "Promise." "On my life," he pulled back, managing a wry smile, "which I suppose is quite literally on the line tonight." "Not funny." "Little bit funny," he sobered. "It's time, are you ready?" "No, yes." The dueling grounds were ancient, a circular arena carved from black stone, ringed with torches that burned with cold silver flames. The council occupied raised seats, while guards and court members filled in behind them. Seraphine was placed in a protected box with Marcus and 6 guards, Dr. Morse hovering nearby with obvious anxiety. Brennan entered from one side, his blonde hair unbound, armed with a longsword that gleamed in the torchlight. The crowd that had gathered for him cheered. He'd built more support than Seraphine had realized. Aldrich entered from the opposite side, similarly armed, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. His supporters, fewer in number but no less fierce, roared approval. Lord Castellan stood at the arena's center. By the old laws, the right of challenge has been invoked and accepted. Single combat to submission or death. The victor claims the throne. Are both parties prepared? "I am," Brennan said. "I am," Aldrich echoed. "Then begin." They crashed together like a thunderstorm. Seraphine had never seen vampires fight at full speed. It was terrifying, blurs of motion almost too fast to track, the clash of swords ringing like bells, superhuman strength behind every blow. They moved through the arena in a deadly dance, neither giving quarter. Brennan was fast, just as Aldrich had said, his youth lending speed to his attacks. But Aldrich was experienced, turning aside strikes with minimal movement, conserving energy while Brennan burned through his. "He's fighting defensively," Marcus murmured beside her, wearing Brennan down. "Is that good?" "If it works, if Brennan doesn't land a lucky blow first." As if summoned by the words, Brennan's blade slipped past Aldrich's guard, opening a gash across his ribs. Dark blood bloomed against the leather. The crowd gasped, Brennan's supporters cheering, Aldrich's allies going tense. Seraphine's hands gripped the box railing so hard her knuckles went white. Aldrich staggered back, and Brennan pressed his advantage with renewed fury. Their swords met again and again, Aldrich giving ground, the blood from his wound staining his armor. "He's injured," Seraphine said urgently. "Can they stop this?" "Not until one yields or falls," Marcus said grimly. Brennan drove Aldrich back toward the arena wall, clearly sensing victory. "Yield, cousin. Save yourself the indignity of dying for a human whore and her mongrel." Aldrich moved. It was too fast for Seraphine to follow. One moment he was on the defensive, the next his sword had swept Brennan's aside, and the hilt smashed into his cousin's face. Brennan stumbled, and Aldrich was on him, raining down blows with sudden, vicious intensity. The defensive fighting had been a feint. Aldrich had been conserving his strength, letting Brennan tire himself, waiting for the younger vampire's discipline to break. It had. Within moments, Brennan was on his knees, Aldrich's sword at his throat, his own weapon lying feet away. The arena went silent. "Yield," Aldrich commanded, breathing hard, blood still seeping from his wound. Brennan's face twisted with rage and humiliation. "Never. Kill me and make me a martyr." "I don't need to kill you to win," Aldrich's voice carried to every corner of the arena. "I just need you to lose, publicly, completely, so that everyone watching knows that your ambition exceeded your ability." He removed his sword from Brennan's throat and stepped back, turning to Lord Castellan. "I declare victory. Brennan lives but is banished from court for his attempt on my queen's life and his failed challenge. The council will determine the extent of his exile." It was masterful, showing mercy while still demonstrating absolute dominance. Brennan couldn't claim martyrdom, and Aldrich avoided making enemies of Brennan's supporters by executing their champion. Lord Castellan rose. "The challenge is concluded. King Aldrich is the victor. Long live the king." "Long live the king," the arena echoed with the cry, even some of Brennan's former supporters joining in, backing the winner, as courtiers always did. Aldrich's eyes found Seraphine's across the arena, and despite the blood and exhaustion, he smiled. He'd won. The royal physician stitched Aldrich's wound in Seraphine's chambers, at the king's insistence that he wasn't leaving her side tonight. The cut was deep, but would heal quickly with his vampiric constitution. "That was incredibly stupid," Seraphine said once they were finally alone, her fear transforming into anger now that the danger had passed. "Letting him wound you like that." "It was strategic." Aldrich winced as he moved, the fresh stitches pulling. He needed to think he was winning. "He could have killed you." "But he didn't." Aldrich caught her hand, pulling her closer. "I told you I wouldn't lose." "You were bleeding." "And now I'm not." Seraphine breathed. She realized she was shaking, the adrenaline and terror of the past hours finally crashing through her. "I thought, when he cut you I thought." "I know." He drew her down to sit beside him, wrapping an arm around her shoulders despite his injury. "I know, but it's over. Brennan is banished, his mage will be executed for the poisoning attempt, and our child's legitimacy is established. We won." Seraphine leaned into him, feeling the solid reality of his presence. "What happens now?" "Now," Aldrich considered. "Now we actually try to be married. We prepare for the child. We deal with the remaining council politics, strengthen our alliances, and probably argue frequently about whether you're taking sufficient rest." "I'm not an invalid." "You're carrying a hybrid child through a dangerous pregnancy while navigating vampire politics. You're allowed to rest." She tilted her head to look up at him. "This is new." "What is it?" "You being protective, caring, honest about your feelings." Aldrich's expression softened. "I told you I was trying to protect you by maintaining distance. That clearly didn't work, so perhaps it's time to try the opposite. Actually let you in. Actually be your husband instead of just your political partner." "I might hold you to that." "Please do." He shifted to face her more fully, serious now. "I meant what I said before the duel. I want to figure out how to make this marriage real. We started backwards, married for politics, pregnancy before partnership, but that doesn't mean we can't find our way to something genuine." Seraphine thought about the past 3 years, the loneliness, the formality, the careful distance. Then she thought about the past few weeks, the vulnerability he'd shown, the protection he'd offered, the way he'd fought for her and their child tonight. "I'd like that," she said softly, "the genuine something." "Good," Aldrich's thumb traced gentle patterns on her shoulder, "because you're stuck with me for at least the next few centuries, and it would be terribly awkward if we stayed this distant the entire time." She laughed despite herself. "Centuries. The child will have vampiric longevity, even if not full immortality, and I'm told hybrid genetics sometimes transfer extended life to the human parent as well." He smiled slightly. "So yes, centuries, I hope that's acceptable." Seraphine had never let herself think that far ahead, too focused on surviving each day, each political battle. But now, with Aldrich's arm around her and their child growing safely inside her, she allowed herself to imagine it. Years of learning to be true partners, watching their impossible child grow, building something real from the political arrangement they'd started with. "It's acceptable," she murmured. They sat together as the night deepened outside the enchanted windows. The crisis finally passed, the future uncertain but no longer quite so lonely. 6 months later, Seraphine gave birth to a daughter. The labor was brutal, exactly as dangerous as the physicians had warned, but with both Dr. Morse and Lady Cordelia working in unprecedented cooperation, mother and child survived. The baby had her mother's dark hair and her father's silver eyes, and when she cried, the sound was strong enough to echo through the royal wing. Aldrich, who had paced outside the birthing room with barely controlled anxiety, was permitted entry once Seraphine had been cleaned up and the baby swaddled. He approached the bed with uncharacteristic hesitation, looking at his wife and daughter with something like awe. "She's perfect," he breathed. "She's loud," Seraphine said tiredly, but she was smiling. "And stubborn. She didn't want to be born. Dr. Morse said she's never seen a baby fight the process quite so hard." Taking after her mother then, Aldrich carefully took the baby when Seraphine offered her, cradling the tiny form with unexpected gentleness. The infant quieted immediately, staring up at her father with those unnervingly alert silver eyes. "Hello, little one, I'm your father. I'm going to make so many mistakes raising you, but I promise I'll try my best." "We'll try our best," Seraphine corrected. Aldrich agreed, looking at her with warmth that still sometimes surprised her, though less often now after months of slowly building genuine partnership. "Have you decided on a name?" They'd debated names for weeks, never quite agreeing, but looking at her daughter now, Seraphine knew. "Lyra," she said, "for the constellation, because she's going to shine bright enough to outdo all the stars." "Lyra," Aldrich tested the name, then nodded. "Princess Lyra, heir to the vampire throne. The council is going to have opinions about raising a hybrid princess." "The council can adjust to the new reality," Seraphine said firmly. "She's ours, she's legitimate, and she's going to be extraordinary." "Yes," Aldrich agreed, looking down at his daughter with fierce pride. "She is." The road ahead wouldn't be easy, raising a hybrid child in a vampire court, navigating politics as an unconventional royal family, dealing with those who would never accept a half-human heir. But they'd survived assassination attempts and challenges and impossible odds already. Together, they'd survive whatever came next. Aldrich carefully returned Lyra to Seraphine's arms, then settled on the bed beside them, his family, unexpected and unconventional and absolutely his. "Our marriage ends today," he quoted softly, referencing that confrontation months ago that had started everything. "That's what I told you." "And I told you I was carrying your heir," Seraphine finished. "Worst dissolution attempt in history," Aldrich said wryly. "I'm terrible at ending marriages." "Good thing," Seraphine murmured, leaning against his shoulder while their daughter dozed between them, "because you're stuck in this one. Wouldn't want to be anywhere else." And in the quiet of the royal chambers, with filtered moonlight painting everything silver, the vampire king and his human queen began writing the next chapter of their impossible story, together. Want more thrilling royal romance and supernatural intrigue? Join my Patreon. The link is in the description below. Exclusive and uncensored episodes are available only on Patreon. Check the link in the description.